Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. Guess what? It's Sunday, and we have the weekly recap, all conveniently located in one spot. That's right here. Remember, it's a recap of the top stories. So if you think to yourself, hey, didn't I see that? Yeah, it's the best of or the recap show. Anyway, thanks for watching. And for those who haven't seen it, I hope you enjoy. Remember, the Constitution matters.
All right, lawyer.
All right, let's go ahead and open the record for Monday, November 3rd, 2025. That's right, some crucial evidence in the Brian Kohberger case is finally being revealed for the public viewing. So on November 13th, 2022, obviously the tragic events unfolded at a residence there on King Road in Moscow, Idaho, where 4 University of Idaho students were fatally stabbed in a brutal home invasion. Brian Kohberger, the criminology graduate student at the Washington State University, who was attending there at the same time, was subsequently identified as the perpetrator through a combination of forensic analysis, digital tracking, and genetic evidence. And following his arrest in late December of 2022, Kohberger ultimately entered into a plea bargain as part of an agreement to avoid the death penalty, resulting in 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for the burglary. And he's currently incarcerated at the Idaho State Maximum Security Institution near Boise. Well, recent disclosures by the Idaho State Police, released in batches since Kohberger's conviction, have made investigative materials, including photographs, laboratory reports, and internal communications among detectives available. These documents, comprising of thousands of pages, focused on DNA, fingerprints, and other physical traces, offer a detailed examination of the evidence that solidified Kohberger's connection to the crime scene. That's right. This release aligns with the ongoing efforts by law enforcement and judicial authorities to maintain transparency while adhering to court orders that prohibit the dissemination of images depicting the victims. So central to the prosecution's case was the leather K-bar knife sheath discovered at the scene, specifically in the bed where Madison Mogen and Kaylee Gonzalez were found. This item, now publicly visible through released photographs, contained trace DNA that forensic experts linked directly to Kohberger through genetic genealogy. Now, investigators attempted to recover fingerprints from the sheath, but they were unsuccessful, and then they had to shift reliance to DNA profiling. Now, the genetic material was cross-referenced with samples obtained from Kohberger post-arrest, confirming a match. To further corroborate this link, police also examined discarded items from Kohberger's family home in Pennsylvania, including napkins, dental floss, straws, lollipop sticks, water bottles, and cotton swabs. And laboratory analysis indicated that the DNA from these items belonged to a close male relative, specifically the likely father of the individuals whose profile appeared on the sheath. Now, the family connection was instrumental in narrowing the suspect's pool during the earliest stages of the investigation. Additional evidence submitted to the Idaho State Crime Lab encompassed bloodstain materials, fingerprint, nail clippings collected during the victims' autopsies, and even cigarette butts found outside the residence. These were scrutinized for potential leads, though many details in the DNA mapping report remain heavily redacted to protect sensitive methodologies. And as you can see from the photos, ladies and gentlemen, just like, unlike Brian Kohberger, I guess I should say, yes, I still have mine that I've had since 1988. Brian Kohberger purchased his earlier in 2022 and lost it. What's the first thing they teach you about being a Marine? Well, you keep track of your gear because it could save your life someday. In this particular case, that's right. That little right there, DNA, that's what brought Brian Kohberger down. He could have got away with it. Not wishing he had. No, we're not wishing that. But he could have got away with it if he hadn't left that knife sheath there. He failed. He lost his gear. All right. And take a look at the glove. Picture of the gloves. I mean, this guy, it's like neoprene. Looks like he's going. I've seen that like on fly fishing stuff, but that looks more like he's going to go scuba diving in the cold water. He clearly was meticulously thinking how he was going to do this and ultimately get away with it. Now, Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra also came under intense scrutiny. Investigators removed and analyzed components such as the seats, floor mats, the gear shifts, and even the turn signal assembly in search of biological or trace evidence linking the vehicle to the scene. Now, while specific findings from these examinations are not fully detailed in the public release, they contributed to establishing Kohberger's presence in the vicinity during the time frame of the murders. Now, digital forensics played a complementary role with experts from Cellebrite, a specialized firm, recovering data from Kohberger's cell phone and laptop despite his attempts to erase records. Notable discoveries included searches related to serial killers, American Psycho style selfies, and inquiries about wiretaps and paranoid psychopaths in the hours leading up to his arrest. A significant void in his phone activity, where the device was powered off at full battery during the critical window of the attacks, served as incriminating evidence, highlighting deliberate efforts to obscure his movement. Analysts noted that in the absence of data, rather than exonerating him, it drew attention to the timeline and bolstered the case against him. Now, the release files include search warrants for the King Road property and accounts from the first responding officers who described the gruesome conditions encountered upon arrival. Initially, there was some confusion that arose in identifying the victims, with the officers mistakenly noting positions and identities, such as believing Kaylee Gonzalez was on the floor near Ethan Chapin before corrections were made. Descriptions highlighted severe facial trauma to one victim, rendering basic features unrecognizable, underscoring the brutality of the assault. Now, of the victims, only Zaina Kernodle had believed to have been awake at the time of the attack, while the others were sleeping and stabbed while they were asleep. Surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen provided additional context, though details remain limited in public disclosures thus far. And also, another aspect is Kohberger's academic pursuits and his prophetic critiques. So get this. So prior to the murders, Kohberger pursued his PhD and submitted research proposals that in hindsight appear eerily relevant. One proposal focuses on how small-town police handle digital investigations, in which he argued that local police departments were undertrained, a claims his professors challenged in marginal notes, questioning whether it was an assumption or an established fact. Ironically, advanced digital forensics by private labs like Cellebrite and Orthrum ultimately unraveled his concealment strategies. Another proposal explored burglars' risk-reward calculations involved planning interviews with incarcerated individuals. Concerns about Kohberger's behavior extended to his interactions with peers and faculty, and a professor at the Washington State University actually warned colleagues of potential risks, including stalking or inappropriate conduct towards these students. These red flags, combined with the isolated social profile, evidenced by phone contacts limited primarily to his parents, painted a picture of a calculated individual whose academic interests may have intersected with his criminal intent. Now, some experts reflect that Kohberger's overconfidence in evading detection, rooted in his studies, contributed to his ultimate downfall. As one retired law enforcement professional noted, his arrogance in critiquing investigative capabilities led to oversights that proved fatal to his defense. Now, police will continue to release records in phases, ensuring compliance with restrictions on the sensitive images. And these materials not only affirm the robustness of the evidence, but also highlight the collaborative efforts of local, state, and federal and private entities to solve this case. Now, while Kohberger's conviction brings a closure to a harrowing chapter, the disclosure serves as a reminder of the meticulous process underpinning modern criminal investigation, right? This case underscores the evolving role of genetic and digital forensics in law enforcement, demonstrating how even deliberate attempts to eliminate traces can inadvertently create evidence voids and strengthen prosecutorial arguments. He did it. I mean, all of his papers, his research, everything he was studying, it was all him planning what took place back there in Moscow, Idaho. It is clear to me He thought he was the smartest guy in the room. And guess what? That pesky little DNA right in here, pesky little DNA, that's what got him. You know, how oftentimes do we say it here on Crime Talk? There's two types of people in the world, those that are humble and those that are about to be. Brian Kohberger thought he was the smartest guy in the room, thought the law enforcement in small towns were just a bunch of country hayseeds, and he could get away with the perfect murder, or in this case, quadruple murder. Well, he was wrong, and he's been humbled, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And in Chaffee County, Colorado, attorneys representing Barry Morphew have sought an extension to adequately prepare for his upcoming homicide trial. Now, the decision, which was laid out November 3rd, rescheduled his arraignment for January 12th, during which he is anticipated to enter a not guilty plea. Remember, here in the state of Colorado, and since Barry Morphew was indicted, he's not entitled to a preliminary hearing. At best, he gets a probable cause review, where the judge would review the grand jury transcripts to see if, in fact, there's probable cause, and the judge will more than likely say, yes, there is. So the defense is saying, hey, we need more time. You know, it's only been like, 3-4 months since our client was arrested. And there's a lot of stuff. The government's had multiple years to do this. And so did Barry Morphew first time around. But this is different. But we need more time, Judge. Judge says, fine, one more continuance until January 12th, 2026. And then we're going to enter a plea. And that is when it gets good, ladies and gentlemen, because then the state has 6 months from that date to get Mr. Morphew to trial. If they fail to do so, obviously the case would be dismissed on speedy trial grounds. You know how many cases I've seen dismissed on speedy trial grounds that I can think of in the state of Colorado in my 30 years of practice? I think one. Okay, it doesn't happen very often. They will oblige Mr. Morphew if he wants to go to trial. Also, if there's going to be some sort of plea negotiations, that will take place as well. And but I anticipate a trial. So let's get going. As you may have recalled, Mr. Morphew faces charges related to the death of his wife, Suzanne Morphew, who disappeared back on Mother's Day in 2020. Her body was ultimately discovered in the southwestern portion of Colorado back in 2023. And forensic examination identified the presence of some potent sedatives and an opioid analgesic in her system, leading authorities to classify her death as a homicide. A grand jury issued an indictment, or should be actually returned an indictment against Barry Morphew back in June of 2025. Alleging that one of the substances involved was a tranquilizer typically used to sedate wildlife, to which he reportedly had some unique access within the state. Very few people in the state had access to this particular tranquilizer known as BAM. So we'll see if it's enough. Obviously, he's entitled to the presumption of innocence. Is it enough to meet the heavy burden that the prosecution has of proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Well, time will tell. Brian Kohberger, he secures a partial victory in the restitution dispute. So in a recent court proceeding, as early as today, you can take a look at it if you don't believe me. All right. But in the 4th District Court, the attorneys representing Brian Kohberger successfully challenged a $27,000 restitution claim, leading the prosecution to withdraw it. Now, this development marks a limited success for Kohberger, who was convicted, obviously, of multiple murders amid ongoing debates over financial obligations to the victim's family. Now, during the hearing, the lead defense attorney for Kohberger argued that Kohberger should not be required to pay the specified amount, noting that the families had already raised substantial funds through crowdfunding platforms to cover travel and lodging costs associated with the case. The prosecution, represented by Bill Thompson, acknowledged an error in its initial interpretation of the plea agreement and conceded that such funds could not be allocated for victim reimbursement in this matter. Consequently, Thompson formally retracted the request for the $27,000. Now, Thompson countered that the defense assertion of Kohberger's financial incapacity by pointing out the external contributions had been received and that the future earnings could potentially enable payment. Now, in response to that, the attorneys for Kohberger emphasized that projections of future income were purely conjecture and maintained that Kohberger currently lacks the means to fulfill even modest obligations, such as approximately $3,000 for funeral-related items, which included urns as stipulated in the plea agreement. Now, the presiding judge indicated that a formal ruling would be issued in the near future following the intense exchange. Notably, Kohberger's legal team is not disputing other financial penalties outlined in the plea agreement, including the $250,000 in criminal fines and the additional $80,000 distributed equally among the families of the victims. Now, the contested $27,000 was intended specifically for travel expenses, with $20,000 allocated for the Gonsalves family and $7,000 to Madison Mogen's mother. As background, obviously, Kohberger entered into a guilty plea earlier this year to 4 counts of murder, a decision that he made to evade the possibility of a capital punishment, i.e. the death penalty. This arrangement has drawn, obviously, some criticism, particularly from the affected families. And since his conviction, Kohberger has been incarcerated at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution in Kuna, which is near Boise, Idaho. Reports indicated that challenges in his confinement, including claims that he was being verbally harassed from other inmates alongside a highly restricted daily routine limited to 1 hour of recreation time outside of his cell. So here's the interesting thing about the hearing that I think is worth also noting. The judge, not exactly particularly impressed with the prosecution as it relates to the withdrawing of the funds, but realizes the statute reads as much, which we talked about just the other day, that they probably weren't entitled to that money. So I guess I called it correctly. All right. But the issue then becomes to the ability to pay. And the judge is like, hey, it looks like the family's been paying him money. He's going to get other sources of money. Why can't the state then draw money from his bank account while he is in custody? I shouldn't say bank account. Let's use his commissary, his books. All right. And I think that's what the judge is going to do. And he specifically said that, there's a plea agreement. So the judge asked, is the plea agreement not valid if you guys didn't agree to the terms? It looks like you agreed to the restitution. Why should we not enforce it? The defense said no. Prosecution was like, well, we want our plea agreement enforced. We just, we want him to pay. We don't want to withdraw any plea bargains in this case. That would be a complete fiasco. So I think ultimately the judge will rule that the state can basically garnish anything that comes into Brian Kohberger's account while he is in custody in accordance with state law, and his inability to pay shouldn't be affected in any way to that. Whatever he gets over the years, who knows? Parents probably send him a few bucks. The state will pull off what they can. That's the law in just about every jurisdiction that I'm aware of. Rex Heuermann's DNA is not a match. So in a recent development related to the Gilgo Beach serial killers investigations, forensic analysts by the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's Office has determined that DNA evidence collected from the 1994 crime scene of Colleen McNamee does not match that of Rex Heuermann, the primary suspect in the Gilgo Beach murders. This comparison was mandated by a court order following a legal challenge from John Bittroff, who was convicted in 2017 for McNamie's murder, and that of Rita Tangretti, based on partial DNA matches on both scenes. The unidentified male DNA profile from McNamie's case, found on clothing and in the victim's body, prompted Bittroff's attorney to seek a review, arguing it could implicate Heuermann and undermine the convictions. However, the judge denied vacating the verdicts, emphasizing that the evidence did not alter the trial's outcome, and Heuermann, who has pled not guilty to charges involving 7 victims, including Sandra Costia, maintains his innocence, with his legal team noting the results align with prior assessments, excluding Heuermann from Mr. Bittroff's cases. And finally, a little news we just couldn't get to. First, a 49-year-old man in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder after police discovered his mother's dismembered body in a kitchen freezer. The suspect, Leroy Vallejos, confessed to choking his mother to death, dismembering her, and hiding her remains for several weeks, citing some delusional beliefs about her conspiring against him. Next, a New York man allegedly murdered his estranged wife with chemicals after she tried to divorce him. Asif Queresi Qureshi, a 53-year-old father of three, pled not guilty to second-degree murder, charges levied against him in court. His late wife, Elena Asif, was found dead at her home in Long Island. We'll just leave it at there. And a jury on Monday found 40-year-old Lyndon Wiggins guilty of aiding and abetting first-degree murder, aiding or abetting first-degree attempted murder, aiding or abetting kidnapping to commit great bodily harm, and aiding or abetting first-degree murder while committing a crime while kidnapping. Wiggins and three others tricked 28-year-old real estate agent Monique Bao on New Year's Eve in 2019 into hosting a house showing before ultimately kidnapping her and murdering her. And finally, a celebrity chef from Arizona has been convicted of killing his wife and children on Christmas Day back in 2017, just shortly after sharing a video online of his son singing carols. Anthony Ross was found guilty by a Maricopa County jury on 3 counts of first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of his estranged wife, Iris, and their 2 kids aged 11 and 10 months.